All right, so we're going to start off with the conference championship games. My favorite moment of it was Travis Kelsey, Taylor Swift out on the field after the game, hugging, walking along. He shoos Taylor away to hug his brother, and his brother says, "You need to fucking finish this thing." Taylor got a little bit dissed there for the brother. I kind of like that.
Yeah, after having to watch him shirtless in Buffalo.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Listen, I mean, Taylor Swift is a nightmare when it comes to dating anyway, and all of her songs are about how boys have broken her heart. So she is probably class A crazy when it comes to relationships.
Yeah.
So, I mean, good for Travis.
Go Travis.
Family first.
Family first.
And she is playing 3 shows in Tokyo the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night before the Super Bowl. Super Bowl
Are you
weekend.
a Swiftie, Mark?
I have 3 girls who are actually traveling overseas at some point for another of the Eras Tour shows.
I've been told that potentially we're going to have to go see Tay Tay next summer in Europe by Cali. So there we go.
I did have to kind of grin and bear it through the movie one night streaming.
Ooh,
I didn't make the whole thing. I can tell you
I haven't had to do that. Now, real quick though, Dan Campbell, a lot of criticism today. Went for it on 4th down a few times there. Didn't kick field goals. What do we think?
I mean, he's always been aggressive, right?
Yeah.
He's a go for it. He has the most go for it than any coach in the NFL.
And statistically, if you run the math, you should go for it on every 4th down. There's a high school coach, I think, in Arkansas, doesn't have a punter on the team and just goes for it on every 4th down. He always onside kicks because the statistics say you should do that. I think the reason coaches don't do that is they don't want to look stupid.
Yeah.
Even though the stats say you should do it.
One way to not be there is not give up a 17-point halftime lead on the road.
Yeah.
So.
And that had more to do with the players than it did Dan Campbell. The one criticism I had, and it was funny because it took 30 minutes this morning over to coffee to explain to the British girlfriend, but the one thing he did do wrong was the 3rd and 2 from the goal line with, call it 50 seconds left, calling a running play, knowing that if it didn't work, it was going to burn the timeout, and that meant the only way you could tie the game is to get an onside kick, which is the lowest probability play in football.
This is random, but I just had a flashback to, I don't know if you saw the recent SNL skit with Nate Bargatze where he's George Washington.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's hilarious. He's got all these grand visions for the new country, and one of them is we'll have our own system of weights and measures, and he talks about, pounds, and 2,000 pounds will be a ton. Well, what will 1,000 pounds be called? Nothing. But he talks about, unpopular sports like track and swimming will be measured in meters and kilometers, but sports like football will be measured in yards.
Oh, that's great.
How many feet? How many feet in a yard? Of course, 12 inches in a foot. Then therefore it must be 12 feet in a yard. No, 3 feet.
Yeah. Bargatze's
Which
funny.
actually I can
big
walk.
fan.
I have an exact 1 yard stance when I walk something off. I've learned it. Yeah. Because in golf, you have to know exactly sort of how far you are from
There's
something.
such a great 12-inch.
They have technology now.
But I can't make it.
They have technology now, but you can't use a rangefinder.
No, you can't. I mean, especially when you're on the putting green. But when I was watching the game, I'm not sure if I like Brock Purdy or not. He's kind of weak, but he's an underdog, and I like underdogs. They didn't look good in the first half. I can't believe they came back. I'm just saying.
He balled out. I will give this to Brock in the second half. I mean, he tucked the ball. He rushed for 3 yards less than Lamar Jackson did in the game against Kansas City. So
wow,
impressive.
Boy, that was a bit of a meltdown in Baltimore.
Yeah, no, that really was
that killer interception.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Mark, kick us off, let's talk LNG, because I think of the stories
Damn.
last week, that was the one that kind of just
And
the
we're trying to get
visceral
Toby Rice to comment.
Yeah.
So we might
Toby had a great tweet. We'll throw the tweet up on the video here, and hopefully Toby will
we'll get a
us
video
something.
from him for the show.
Yeah, it's the White House sent out an announcement last week just basically saying pending LNG export projects are going to be paused for the foreseeable future in order to assess the environmental and economic impact.
So what I thought they said, maybe I read it wrong, was pending projects are okay if you're in the permitting process. That's what's getting paused.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, they're going
so
to.
if you're building right now and stuff, you're okay, but
because it's really hard.
If you're thinking about it,
it's really hard to stop once something's in construction. You do have phases where they do inspections, and that can be slowed down, as I've currently been aware of with a personal project. But I think it's really permitting is where most of the action happens.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I commented on a bit of a sidebar, but I'd seen some discussion or something was published on Saudi developing their big shale gas project, Al Jafara, which is in the eastern desert, and the projections are they're going to be at 2.2 BCF a day and over 600,000 barrels of NGLs and condensate by 2030. And if you remember, back in October, they did put a $500 million minority investment into MidOcean, which has got and is seeking stakes on, I think, 4 Australian LNG projects. So another global player in the LNG market's looking to press full steam ahead. And, we're continuing to contemplate our navel on things that, could potentially have longer-term kind of structural market share implications.
I'm going to speak for BDE because I think we're all on board with this. Basically, we are free market in nature. Let's build projects. Let's let them stand or fall based on the economic realities of what happens. We're also, I think we would all agree, we can't really foresee the future. And so sitting here making these long-term predictions of, Europe's not going to need LNG, so let's not build it. We're like, let markets decide, generally speaking. So we would be, hey, we've got these permitting policies, procedures in place. If people want to build, knock yourself out. Is there actually a legitimate reason on the other side that we should be pausing LNG permitting?
I don't think there's any energy security reason. I mean, we've got an absolute boatload of natural gas from both dry gas sources and associated gas. And because U.S. crude production increasingly is dependent upon the ability to process and handle and take away gas, such as the Permian Basin, which is now at 17 BCF a day of mostly associated gas, you run into, I guess, a confinement problem where you can't do anything with the gas at some point.
Right.
I mean, fields get limited on their ability to process and handle gas. And if the economics aren't there, you're not going to build the expansion infrastructure to handle that.
That's what the opponents are trying to say is it's a natural resource. If we build all the projects, I think I saw a number, somebody was saying that would be 15 or 20% of the daily gas volumes we'd be exporting and that people don't need it now. That's at least the argument I've seen back, and I think you just refuted that very eloquently.
And I've seen kind of an intermingled narrative, if you will, about Europe is not going to be needing as much going forward. So
why is that, Mark?
Not well explained.
Exactly. I mean, there's a few more.
But if you have options from Qatar and Saudi and other places that are going full steam ahead, then again, ceding market share and the economics from a U.S. producer and exporter might ultimately not work, but the market will decide that. And where have we not seen in these big infrastructure build outs where things get overbuilt, returns on capital get eroded, and the market ultimately takes care of it.
Yeah. Two things I would say is $2 gas tells you that it's probably not that significant a national treasure that needs to be hoarded. That's kind of number one. Hate to go back to Adam Smith. Number two, tell me what the weather's going to be like the next 5 years in Europe, because
that's right.
The only reason they have skated by is we've had 2 very, very warm winters in Europe, although it did not feel like that when I was over on the island.
Didn't feel like that here. But
I mean, there's a few things. There's one is you have, sure, we could redirect the gas to the entire Northeast, but the Northeast doesn't want the gas, so they're actually continuing to use fuel oil to warm the Northeast. So what do you do with the gas? On a international perspective, it's bigger than just looking internally. We are trying to keep the dollar strong. Our economy is dependent upon the rest of the world, and the more we lose market share in gas, really it puts a harder burden on the United States to be competitive, and that's the bigger issue.
Yeah,
that's the concern, that we're letting others get market share globally. That's a problem.
Well, and the other thing too is if we're not maximizing markets, we destroy the infrastructure that creates that market, i.e. we lay down rigs, people get fired,
right,
et cetera, and you don't want to kill that capability. We've all been through a pandemic where we didn't have certain capabilities in the United States, and it really, really sucked.
I mean, we're shutting down LNG, but we're on hyperdrive, we're importing fentanyl. So, I mean, let's put it in perspective.
let's do so.
Well, and it's it's ultimately a win for coal globally.
That's true. This is true.
So,
and we hate coal.
And we've shown over the course of the last 15 or 20 years what the substitution of gas for coal does from an emission standpoint.
I love how oil and gas
and that travels.
It's so much better for the environment.
Yeah,
we're environmentalists when it comes to coal.
Yeah, exactly.
And if I lived in West Virginia, I'd be so pro coal. I'd be a coal miner.
Yes.
I've said as far back as your
Yeah.
energy draft from a couple of years ago that natural gas, and just given the endowment that North America has, and particularly the U.S., all the way up to the North Slope, is you can play offense and defense strategically over the long haul with natural gas, just given the strength and advantages we have and the know-how. So,
geopolitics change when you can tell other people screw you.
Right.
It really does. Yeah. That's a good point, Mark. All right. Speaking of, one other point I want to make on LNG. Let's talk U.S. politics. Clearly, this was Biden to the base that's not fired up about him. Hey, guys, I'm here, environmentalists. We're going to do this pause. Throwing a little bit of red meat to them. I also think it was kind of 3D.
I think they're more vegetarian, Chuck. So let's easy.
There we go. Fair enough.
What's that fake meat called?
Beyond Meat.
Beyond. Yeah,
they threw a little Beyond Meat.
They threw him a Beyond Meat porterhouse, right? So.
Duly corrected on.
I was watching
one.
some
Very
reality.
good.
I was watching some reality show with my wife. It was hilarious, and they were in California, and one person says to the other, like, "Oh, I want to have a steak." He's like, "You're eating red meat?" It's like, "Yeah, what's wrong with that?" Because everyone knows red meat's bad for you, and he's like, "How so?" And the guy had no reply. Like, well, everyone just knows it's bad for you.
Yeah, it's just
good data.
Is.
Good data.
The
source.
proverbial they said.
They say everyone knows red meat's bad.
Hey, before
for
we
you.
leave it, I feel like your headgear has got some kind of tie-in to this LNG story. Could you
I don't
explain
know.
that?
I'm wearing it correctly, according to Digital Wildcatters.
I always looked so bad in the hard hat. I was like, no pictures, please. First and only time.
You look like a
in
financial
my life.
guy out on location.
I'm a suit. Yeah, exactly.
I'm just scared that the ceiling's gonna, cave in on us. So
Probably. No, but I think the other thing this did too is basically the shot across the bow of, hey guys, we can just pause permitting here. If that causes one investor to look at a project and go, a little too much risk there, then that's a victory.
Well,
for the environmentalists.
I mean,
and that's part of
Well,
this.
if anyone ever argues the old adage from long ago that political risk in the U.S. is low or lower,
I mean,
I think
no
that's in some cases been turned on its head.
I mean, speaking of throwing red meat, but what happened over in France in the Louvre, the Mona Lisa, and what did they throw at the Mona Lisa? The Mona Lisa, which I mean, I don't think she's that pretty, but it's one of our world treasures.
Arguably the most famous painting on the planet.
And what happened to it?
Soup.
They threw soup. Was it vegetarian soup or not? We need to know.
It looked like their standard tomato soup. I didn't see a close-up of the video.
Did someone die? Did some animal die in that soup? That's what I want to know.
So we can do this on another show, and I've talked a little bit about the podcast, the Rogan podcast that Taylor Sheridan did with Rogan not too long ago, and they talk about this very thing. Obviously, Sheridan and his 4-6's ranch, and they're big in the beef business, but they talk about the actual just utter destruction of life that goes into some of these farming operations, particularly in California, where he said you drive through the San Joaquin Valley, what don't you see? You don't see any birds because of all the things that they kill for these groves and the whole, I learned that I think every almond on an almond tree consumes 10 gallons of water in its production.
Yeah.
So
we do have to give him props, because the funniest thing, we were just sitting in the office and Colin's in there, and we were saying, hey, what happened with the Louvre? They threw soup on it, and Colin's walking by. Changed the way I view oil and gas, that's for sure. That was awesome.
Well, he's young and impressionable. So.
Yeah, perfect. So, yeah, I don't get this stuff, but I guess it's the echo chamber for the environmentalists. They go, "Yay, we threw soup at the Mona Lisa," but
well, the Louvre had to have been in on it, because how can you? I mean, they had. If you watch the video, which we're going to post, they kind of just had free reign at this painting. Yeah. They walked in.
And it's not the first time.
It's not the first time.
Anything.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So I don't get it. Let's stay over in Europe. So, Kirk, this is your story. Activists are going in all these different directions. BP's getting sued. I never thought I'd ever feel sympathy for BP. I might even feel sympathetic for them. What's going on?
Interesting.
Be careful.
London hedge fund Bluebell, which, not the ice cream. London hedge fund Bluebell called for the abandonment of irrational strategy that has depressed BP's shareholder value. So basically what they're telling BP is that they're concerned that they're reducing their oil and gas production, and they made a pledge to reduce it. Originally, Bernard Looney, who's no longer their CEO, pledged to reduce oil and gas production by 40%. They dialed that back to 25% by 2030 compared to 2019 levels. And the hedge fund is saying you're destroying shareholder value by moving away from hydrocarbons faster than society. And the reality is BP is trying to move towards renewable projects, which have lower returns. So this is basically a story about the shareholders coming back with a vengeance, saying you're not going to destroy this company, and we're going to come after you. So you're seeing the tide turn.
Because this is on the heels of a $600 million write-down in their solar renewables business.
That's
by
correct.
BP.
And if you look at Exxon, Total, Chevron, Shell, and BP is trading at the lowest multiple compared to all of them.
And it's been that way for a while.
For a long time.
And so,
because remember what BP meant beyond petroleum. They've been sort of, Macondo was another one of these like hiccups, but their whole strategy to get ahead of the society and the market has really depressed their shares. And investors are starting to speak louder than before.
Which stands in contrast to one thing we talked about last week, which is Exxon going the court route to try and get resolutions related to Scope 3 knocked off the proxy.
Traditionally, you go through the SEC because it usually was an unbiased, government unbiased. Excuse me, let me pause for a moment, but it was a strategy. However, in the recent administration, it's become more of a kangaroo court. And as a result, Exxon's going a sort of what they think is going to be a better strategy by using the courts.
Let's bring up some, I think, relevant and pretty current statistics. If you remember, Bobby Tudor at Fuse said the total capital spent by the top 7 majors, top 7 producers, is I think $122 billion.
Yeah, I just said 130 billion.
130 billion,
something like that. Yeah,
we spend $1 trillion order of magnitude on renewables last year. That needs to be, according to proponents, 3x that. And so if it needs to be 3x that, if it's $3 trillion, if those 7 put all of their capital budgets into renewables, you're down in the high 2s. Yeah. So it's always, I get why they're really the lightning rod for needing to make these, as BP is proving, way too fast pivots. But does it really matter, given the magnitude of capital that is at stake here or on the table, to affect this transition? And so I think, as we were discussing before the show, how absurdly irrational does it look to look at companies that have been fighting to generate competitive returns over 100+ years,
right?
And then all of a sudden expecting that would be a good investment case for a hard pivot into something where they particularly don't have a raw materials and manufacturing cost advantage for sure, because of the Chinese lead in a lot of the segments of renewables. So,
and the thing that always gets me too is I've never been able to wrap my head around energy companies are just so greedy. All they care about is profits. I guarantee you this: if it was more profitable to put up a wind turbine, nobody wants to drill a well. I mean, there's some people that want to just for the sake of it, but at the end of the day, if they could make more money doing renewables, they would just do it. You can't have it both ways. You can't say they're greedy and making all this profits and then turn around and say, well, renewables are actually cheaper, and that's the reason they should make their hard pivot.
There's one thing that we know is been proven, and Milton Friedman said in 1970 article, the social responsibility of business is to maximize profits. And when you don't do that, you're going to get fired, or shareholders will move their shares, their money, to somebody else that will.
And that's
end of story.
That's foundational to limited liability in U.S. markets.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. That's the trade-off, is that your singular focus is on maximizing shareholder value and profitability.
Well, and the bottom line is we have, in effect, a dictator that can do whatever they want, and the Chinese are still building a lot of coal plants.
That's right.
So I don't, and they're building a lot of renewables too, but it's not cheaper.
And their control of the raw materials through processing, and in some cases finished product supply chain is a huge competitive advantage over kind of this multi-decade period of time. I heard one thing. I was listening to Dan Yergin on another podcast on COBT last week, and he was giving a lot of perspective from Davos. But one of the things he talked about, and they S&P and Yergin have done work on copper in the recent past, but he was talking about the processing aspect. It's one thing to site the mines and dig the stuff out of the ground, but the processing aspect of it is obviously hugely important. I think the comparative statistics between the U.S. and China, the U.S. has 5 operating copper smelters. China has 55 and growing. And really kind of maybe the realistic or cynical takeaway, depending on your
copper's used
mindset.
in basically everything. by
Right.
the way.
But the cynical mindset is we've got less than a snowball's chance in hell to accelerating a permitting timeline for building things in this country like copper smelters, which use a lot of thermal energy, as far as I know.
They're pretty energy intensive.
So, you know,
Need a lot of heat.
how are companies like BP and Exxon that operate in Western markets that have a lot of regulatory and political hurdles to do the things that I think you need to be competitive in actually building a bulletproof supply chain from cost perspective and a resource security perspective? How do we do that if we can't build and operate critical components in that supply chain to make all that happen? You know, you control it from well permitting, go out and drill and complete a well. You may own the gathering and processing. You may own the downstream and the marketing. You know, it gives us a huge advantage in this business, but that's developed over 150 years. And again, the trying to pivot and make something happen within a 25-year time frame that's taken us naturally when we go through these evolutions of energy, which take over a century. It really seems to be a bit of a mismatch in terms of what we can reasonably do and what we emotionally want to do.
Well, and the problem I have, getting back to what we do here on BDE, being part of the media, is why aren't we held why aren't the environmentalists held accountable for that? Okay, this is your view of the world. How are we going to get the copper? Where are we going to do it? Can we talk about it? Instead, if I say on here, I don't believe in global warming, YouTube's going to shut down this video, and no one in the media will just gently push back. Show me your plan. You know, I'd love to see how we're going to have all these electric vehicles and all these minerals. Where are they going to be? We don't ever see that.
Physics and chemistry and thermo are,
the reality
ruthless
is
disciplinarians.
the protesters are usually funded by someone that they don't have jobs, and they run around using some billionaire's, budget to do these things while the rest of us are working. I mean, that's the reality. Here's another funny story. We'll probably spend more time next week talking about it, but I just wanted to introduce it. This is hilarious to me. So nuclear is back, right? People are like, we need nuclear because it's a cheap base load, relatively safe. Who's the top nuclear developer? It's a French company, EDF. So they've been building. So they have a project that actually Macron, when he was finance minister, Britain's been trying to build a nuclear plant, Hinkley Point, and construction started in 2017. They're expected to finish in 2025, but it's way over budget. It's $13 billion over budget. What's funny is we have left nuclear construction up to the French. The French clearly cannot do anything efficiently, and so it's almost hilarious because the whole future of nuclear is in the hands of the French, and they're great at it. I mean, they do dominate nuclear, but they just can't build anything on time. And there's a project in Normandy, there's a project in Finland and in China where everything's way over budget, and it's EDF that's behind it, and they're way in debt. But so it'll be interesting to track nuclear over the next few years on the show, as we've been talking about it's coming back. But when you think about who's actually building these plants, and you realize it's a French company and they're in trouble, we'll be tracking that story.
Well, we got to be careful about the glass house. What's the project in Georgia that is?
I'm not saying that
you wanted more pushback between us. So here you got it. So I don't think the story is any rosier in the U.S. Although I did see something. I didn't read the full article, that there was a headline that at least conceptually being discussed of maybe having a small modular reactor at the University of Illinois Champaign.
Okay.
So to your vision, your future of...
That was Mark Rossano on the policy draft, micronuclear.
Right, micronuclear. But this was a headline around a university system.
Yeah.
talking about SMRs as a potential alternative.
I mean, SMRs
solution.
has been sort of last 4 years have been a venture's dream. You know, let's go.
Where did the first actual reaction take place? Just up the road in Chicago, under the
This is true.
Amos Alonso Stadium football field at the University of Chicago.
What I can't speak to now that I dogged the French here for a second, and I love French food and I love their wine, and is that this could be all based on permitting. It might not actually be. I mean, it might be just all the things around nuclear versus we just don't know how to build things. It could be all of the other things. I mean, I know in London, in the UK, the Hinkley project, a lot of it is, delays based on not only financing but public sentiment, and that's going to be interesting to watch.
So there's a guy, and I'm looking it up right now to see if I can find it. There's a podcast called Titans of Nuclear, and it's a guy who was just a student at MIT, and he wanted to hear about nuclear. So he just started calling all these big dogs in nuclear, and he didn't think he would get a phone call back. And everybody's like, yeah, I'd love to talk to you. In one of his episodes, one of the folks talking about nuclear was saying the problem is the first one is almost from scratch, right? Because we're not building these on a regular basis.
Right.
And so if you actually wanted to do these cost effectively, you'd get the industry together, you'd choose one format, and you'd just start replicating. And the first one would cost 10, the second one would cost 6, third one would cost 4, and eventually you'd get it down to 2. But that's the problem is, we built all these things back in the 70s, right? And everything's changed. Technology, permitting, public sentiment, all that. So you're literally building all this stuff from scratch.
Interesting. Yeah.
Although I will give my people in Britain some credit. They are actually playing 4D chess right here. You know what they're doing? They're slowing nuclear so that we're going to delay, so we have enough in global warming, because with 1.5 degrees, 2 more degrees, the greatest champagne region in the world is going to move north into England.
Dang.
The French will be second-rate citizens when it comes to wine.
Dang.
With 2 more degrees.
Wow.
That's what they're doing.
This is the
breaking
war is back.
Yeah, the war's back.
The war is back.
We're going to fight it through grapes. So
not through tennis. It's now moving to grapes.
It's moving to grapes. I like it. So one other thing, since we're on funny stuff, the electric vehicle buses.
My goodness, man. So
this is you were giggling. So
I've been
honors.
giggling because all these cities around the United States and Canada have been purchasing these EV electric vehicle buses. And there's one company called Proterra that's been the primary manufacturer, and they went bankrupt in August. So I've been tracking through our friend Energy Absurdity, David Blackman. This is sort of the list. Asheville, North Carolina, out of 5 buses out of the fleet, 3 are out of commission because it's broken and they have an irreparable door, and it's going to cost like $40 million to fix just the door. Stockton, California, 6 out of 17 buses are not operating, and they have charging issues. Duluth, Minnesota, they're experiencing issues with cracked chassis and inability to climb steep hills, and Proterra is no longer doing anything, so they can't get help. South Philadelphia, buses are stopping due to cracked chassis, can't fix them. Edmonton, Alberta, they purchased 60 buses, most of which are not running. Jackson Hole, Wyoming, all 8 purchased buses broke down at some point. 2 were fixed and running as of December. So they've sort of bought into the EV dream of public transportation, and it's a nightmare. Not only were the buses 5 to 10 times more expensive than a regular ICE bus, but they're screwed. And Proterra is bankrupt, so
their OEMs out of business.
Their OEMs out of business. So a lot of people's tax dollars kind of wasted on that front. It's interesting to watch. I mean, the fever was high.
And per chance, are we having to go back and use older buses that aren't as emissions efficient as maybe newer buses might have been? Yeah.
Well, this is the, similar example. We've talked broadly about all the hope around S-curves all over the place where you run into the reality of doing things in the physical world, like building cars. It's really hard to do, and accelerating physics is I think proven to be in some cases a fool's errand.
The worst analogy out there is software, because relatively speaking, software code is easy to write, and you can
True.
and it builds upon itself over time, and so you truly can have, when you think technology and you think software-based stuff, you truly can have S-curve type acceleration on stuff. But to your point, like physical stuff, I mean,
building cars is hard.
Yeah, and we've been doing that for 125 years with
building wind turbines.
combustion.
If you haven't done it before, and installing them on time, on budget, is hard.
Yeah,
if that's not your
totally.
core business, and you don't have a lot of reps doing it. So
totally. I mean, just look back at any, like an old refrigerator. I mean, they've gotten a lot better over time. It just,
yeah, but it never pays to repair appliances of any kind anymore. They're designed to fail, so you have to replace them every 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, we made that choice in the United States.
Although I have a 20-year-old refrigerator, so it's still humming along.
Yeah, exactly. Mark, real quick, let's close show out with oil. What's going on with oil markets? There was hedge fund, crude short covering.
Yeah, I mean,
all
you just
that.
had in paper markets. You just had a flurry of short covering last week, and so we've seen support in TI move into the mid to upper 70s. There's still all the crosswinds of, particularly the conflicts, and worries crop up about, is the Chinese engine going to continue to accelerate from here? Still a lot of concern around demand, although OPEC came out, I think, last week and strengthened its demand outlook for 2025, reiterated 2024, which is over 2.5 million barrels a day. I haven't seen what the IEA said. So this is maybe a bit of momentum on the back of, NYMEX inventories really starting to precipitously fall. And so that inventory still remain a very important physical indicator that drives trading behavior. And so I think we're not, based upon the sideways nature of the equities, we're certainly not kind of all clear up and to the right, but we did see a flurry of mostly short covering last week that was pretty supportive of TI. It's going to be interesting as the upstream companies, the E&Ps, start to report here, that on the heels of what Schlumberger and Baker Hughes had said, international's looking pretty solid, a few percentage points of growth. The early pronouncements or the forecast for 2024 for North America is flat to down in terms of spending and activity. It'll be interesting to see how, against the backdrop of kind of recent commodity strength, falling inventories, what the upstream companies have to say about what their spending outlook is for 2024. So that's coming here over the course of the next few weeks. The interminable fourth quarter end of year reporting season that seems to last all the way into March.
Yeah, because I'll get this stat totally wrong, and one of y'all too correct me, but I believe, what is it, there are 10 to 12 financial barrels on the planet for each barrel of production daily. I think it's, how the math works out.
Sounds right, but I'm not going to hang my hat on
we'll
it.
go look it up and actually correct, but it's something to that magnitude. So you truly can have these disconnects, but at some point, you're right, fundamentals matter. So, okay, refresher from last week. The girlfriend pointed out, because she read an article in The Economist, that 7 out of the 10 most populous nations are going to the polls in 2024. So 2 billion people in 70 countries are going to vote this year. So it really is 2024. And geopolitically, even some of the non-populous countries, but important ones like Great Britain, who else? Mozambique, the European Parliament, Azerbaijan, Congo, they're going to have elections. Congo's election was December of 2023. Next week we will cover it for, let's say, 5 minutes, because some interesting things happened. And obviously with what we were talking about today, all the precious metals from Congo, we need to watch this stuff. So there are going to be some wild things this year. One that she pointed out was just AI use in fraud for elections. And in the New Hampshire primary, there were actually reports of Joe Biden's voice calling, saying, "Please don't vote in the primary. Don't write my name in. Just don't worry about it." And that was a fraudulent call. So a lot of interesting stuff.
And in the U.S., we've got the continuing sideshows that are the primary season for the Republicans. I don't know if you guys saw, was it Friday, the judgment came out against Trump in the E. Jean Carroll case. I think in 83.3 million, I think was the number. So, and on the heels of things like that, his popularity continues to rise, which is.
I really thought when he said the John McCain thing about, I like heroes that aren't captured, I thought that was the end of it. So I have no barometer in terms of being able to hear something he says and figuring out how the populace is going to react to it. So anyway, appreciate everybody tuning in to the show. Make sure you forward it, leave some comments on it, and peace out.